Grant comes across the river and he wins 5 major battles on his way to Vicksburg. It's kind of a forced march through the state. He captures Jackson, and in 18 days he marches 200 miles, wins 5 battles, 4 of them in just 6 days, and then besieges the city. And the Confederates hold on for 47 days. But while they're holding on, Grant's armies are pillaging and burning plantations, farms, capturing slaves all around Mississippi. So it was a kind of an irony. The longer the Confederates held Vicksburg, the greater they lost, really their whole way of life.
You might understand that in Mississippi, there is attention paid to the people of Vicksburg who were under siege for 47 days and who went hungry and suffered as a result. Does your book focus on that at all?
I try to give equal coverage to both sides. I not only cover the boys on the line. I mean, these guys had it tough. They had no protection, no tents, no shelters, and no relief, no reinforcements. So they slept on their guns through scorching heat, rainstorms, things like that. They're low on ammunition for a while. They solved that problem, and the real problem was hunger. And inside the city, I mean, Grant had them cornered. Really, there was no way to get out of the city, and he bombarded the city. Unlike Sherman, who evacuated Atlanta before he bombed it, Grant didn't allow the evacuation of women and children. And the bombing is pretty indiscriminate. They're throwing these gigantic mortars into the city, big 220-pound shells, and they're aiming directly at churches and homes and anything. It's kind of like saturation bombing in World War II, only because Vicksburg people had dug caves into the sides of those soft, lowest soil hills. They were protected from a lot of this fire. And also you could see these mortars coming. They had a long fuse. They went way high in the sky like fireworks, and then they fell. So casualties were minimal, but physical damage was tremendous. The campaign that Grant originally launched was supposed to be done in an orderly fashion, and the troops were prohibited from entering homes and burning private households and things like that. But the troops got out of control. They began to see that even those who weren't abolitionists, that slavery was hurting them, that it was releasing Southern boys to fight. Slaves were building fortifications. The cotton they grew was sold and to buy ammunition. So whether abolitionists or not, they're out to free slaves, and they do that in tremendous numbers. And in addition, there's a lot of resentment toward the South for seceding from the Union. Why are we down here from Wisconsin? They kind of seceded. We wouldn't be here if they hadn't. With our lives on the line and our families back in Iowa. That turns into indignation, and you get an awful lot of indiscriminate pillage where they're actually entering homes, stealing private garments from women's drawers, ripping earrings off the ears of women, some of the nastiest of the Yankee soldiers. So they get out of control. Later on, this becomes official U.S. policy where Grant didn't want his men enticing blacks into their lines. He didn't know how to handle them. After a while, Lincoln orders him to do that and also to recruit black males for military service. So by the end of the campaign, Grant has freed over 100,000 slaves in the Mississippi Valley, and he's put 26,000 of them in Union Blue.
There was a caption on one of the pictures in the book that said that Mississippi slaves found freedom behind the lines of Grant's army. So did slaves literally follow the troops?
Yes, they would. Wherever Grant's army moved in Mississippi. For example, the first time Grant invades Mississippi is in late 1862. Wherever he goes, there's a lot of evacuation. Confederate families become refugees, and they take their families and their best slaves, their most productive slaves, to Georgia, Alabama, Louisiana. It's easier for a lot of the older slaves to escape to the Union lines. And even in areas where there hadn't been evacuation, they find their way behind Union lines. And once behind those lines, Congress had passed legislation in the summer of 62 that said if a slave came behind the Union lines, he was free and forever free and couldn't be returned to his or her master. And slaves know this, and this is even before the Emancipation Proclamation. And the Emancipation Proclamation, of course, opens this wide open because it only frees slaves in the South. It would like say, Grant doesn't free the slaves in his own country, as it were, at the time, the United States. He left slaves in border states like Missouri, Delaware. Slavery was intact, but he frees all slaves in states that are in rebellion against the Union.
Donald L. Miller is the author of Vicksburg, Grant's Campaign That Broke the Confederacy. Thank you very much for sharing some of the highlights with us.
Thank you for the time.